Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Depressed Dior, and this is Langrisser Mobile. As I mentioned in the last video, point matches are over, so it's the end of the season for me. Elimination matches should be happening this upcoming weekend. I don't usually watch them because I usually tend to just watch the Chinese matches instead, just to kind of see what's up ahead. Overall, kind of just came and went for me for most of these matches. I had some struggles in the beginning because I didn't exactly know what sort of box I wanted to go with. So I wanted to go ahead and just kind of review exactly what kind of happened. I think I ended at like 50% win rate, which is probably maybe slightly better than what I usually do because I usually float around 40%. A lot of new additional characters and changes have definitely changed the box to be something a little bit more viable. Being restricted to only female characters has made certain aspects of PvP a lot more difficult for me, simply because the top tanks were mostly male characters such as Juggler and Landius. But the additions of Albedo and Hilda and Freya becoming SP Freya definitely gave a much needed boost on tanking and as well as faction buffing options for me. But let's go ahead and take a quick look. So I went ahead and this is the formation I had initially. The only exception, of course, was back then at the beginning of the season, SP Freya was not out yet, but I was still using regular Freya. So obviously I was a little all over the place with this one. I had some attempts to try to maybe mess around with some AoE. I wanted to use Aryan Rod. I actually put forth a lot of effort to get her to 6 stars. Devoting a lot of Gates of Fate and all that to that. But the only time I ever used her, I used her incorrectly, and then I never really used her again. And it's kind of the same situation for Akka. Akka I never used because I just was not comfortable with the idea of just rushing. Even though I tended to rush a lot with Angelina, I was more comfortable with Angelina kind of just doing her own thing rather than relying on another character to set up for a full-on rush. Obviously, the biggest danger for doing a full-on rush is if it fails, you're pretty much dead because it's an all-or-nothing type thing usually. Sakura I used a little bit, but not that much. Usually it was just kind of like a default option. I think I used her in one match where I won, and I pretty much just used her as an added DPS really more than anything. At first, Shaltir didn't do too well in the beginning because she kind of got just blasted by magic. But honestly, Shaltir has been kind of surprising on how effective she is. She actually does really good damage, especially since I tend to go against a Cavalry Landius in the early season. Shaltir was a very good counter for that. And also, she's just... her extra action actually really helps out a lot. The only thing that kind of sucks about her is she has to be at 100% HP to get the most out of her kit. And so any sort of damage she takes will completely reduce her mobility as well as her raw attack power. The other issue is her extra action requires setup. Essentially, you have to go and attack at least once, and at that point you're in engagement, which means you're either holding your own or you're getting blasted with AoE, depending on what sort of group you're going up against. I did bring back Liana this season. I dropped TRS. There were people in the past that asked why I didn't use Liana, and I kind of did it just as a kind of... I didn't want to overly rely on Liana because she's definitely a top healer, and I didn't want to just rely on her as a crutch. But it has gotten to the point where TRS just doesn't do enough anymore. Because it's either I'm getting blasted with AoE, which means her passive doesn't work, or my opponent is one-shotting my tank, in which case the passive wouldn't work. Or if they don't one-shot my tank, it's usually someone like Yusuke, or I guess in some cases Elwyn, who can do anti-heal, in which case the passive won't work either. And honestly, Attack Blessing is nice, but in most cases, Attack Blessing usually just means I get killed by Thorns faster. So I ended up dropping TRS and picking up Liana, which gave me a little bit more flexibility. In most cases, my opponent just ended up banning Liana, and I would just grab Sophia. And Sophia was kind of my go-to healer, just simply because her passive exclusive item will essentially ensure I at least have some sort of buffing for everybody. It's a little awkward to use simply because the passive buff only lasts 2 rounds as opposed to the 4 rounds that a faction buff will last. Obviously, I picked up Albedo, I think it was around the end of last season, and I kept with her. She's someone that can actually tank magic. She's rather good at tanking. The only bad part was, of course, she's not very good at anything else. You don't really use her for offense that often, and she doesn't really have anything to help other party members survive AoEs or anything along those lines. Besides that, the kit's pretty standard. I didn't really use Lycoris too much. I didn't really like relying on AoE, because obviously that was kind of the main meta, and I wanted to do something different. Also, my Lycoris, I didn't really know exactly what to do with her. She was just kind of like a backup healer in the worst case scenario in most of my matches. Or at least the few matches where I was forced to pick her. Obviously, a lot of this was mostly trying to focus on using young Jessica's extreme range, and hopefully having an assassin either in the form of Sherlinka, Illustrial, or Zerida. The rest I didn't really know what I was doing, and then Shaltir was just someone I kind of grabbed and got surprised at how well she actually did in most cases. The only thing to be careful about with Shaltir is if she gets anti-buffed, she can't actually build stacks on our Frenzy, so that's something to note there. So one quick thing I ended up changing in this box was I actually dropped Akka pretty quick because I just didn't use her. I didn't like sacrificing an entire slot for just a buff, even though Akka does pretty well damage-wise. In most cases, I needed something more reliable and someone that can actually whose entire purpose was to do damage. So I ended up dropping Akka, and I ended up picking up Mystery Knight, I believe. Where is she? Mystery Knight. There she is. Mystery Knight is like, I like the idea for Mystery Knight. She's a magic using cavalry, and she can ignore terrain. Obviously, that was an issue with old Landius. She had some hit and run potential and the ability to reduce her cooldowns just by moving around, but in execution, she just doesn't do enough damage. Is the problem. There's just better units out there. Rosalia here does just simply does better. Hopefully, I said that name correctly. Want me to find out? Yeah, Rosalia. Yeah, for whatever reason, she doesn't do enough. She did win me a match or two during the season, but for the most part, I either just didn't find a place for her. The other issue is she just doesn't fit faction-wise. She's like strategic and Gillis, and I don't have faction buffs for those. So she only stuck around for a little while before I swapped her out for, I believe at this point I went ahead and brought back Angelina. I did mention at the end of last season I tried to get away from Angelina, but Angelina was just so threatening against my opponents that having her gave me a lot more options on how to deal with my opponent. And a lot of opponents have difficulty trying to work around her AoE extra action stuff. So I went ahead and brought her back in, but at least this time I was less reliant on just her, unlike in the previous season. So I was kind of okay with just sticking with her for just a bit longer. After that, I think I stuck with this for a while until essentially Tensei Jessica and Marielle came out. At that point, I started dropping some other characters. Actually, correction. I actually did one other change before Tensei Jessica and Marielle, and that was I dropped Sakura. I dropped Sakura and picked up Estelle. This gave me some buff flexibility. I was running into some issues where people were force banning my tank. Well, they would ban my tank and then like ban my Sophia, and that left me with like no buffs essentially. So to fix that, I brought in Estelle again, just to give a little bit of tank flexibility. I mean, Estelle's pretty good. The only issue is she can't tank magic, and she can't guard against magic, and she can't tank magic very well. And as far as doing damage, like I mentioned before, I'm not built to do AoE. So even if I did some damage with AoE, it is what it was, essentially. After that, I did do kind of major changes once I got Tensei Jessica and Marielle. Marielle was a little bit of a more difficult pick, simply because she didn't have the factions that I could use at the time. But essentially, I ended up dropping Arian Rod and Estelle at that point, and then that's when I picked up these two characters. Marielle was amazing, even without a faction buff, even without any buffs. She just did really impressive damage. She's still kind of hard to use for me, just simply because I was so reliant on just using Sophia stuff, and so she just burned through her very limited buffs very quickly. And fighting against a Marielle is just terrifying. There's just no going around it. She's just a really difficult character to deal with. And then, of course, we picked up Tensei Jessica, which I didn't really get to use much. My opponent tended to first ban, or not first ban, but pretty early ban Tensei Jessicas, even though my Tensei Jessica has only recently hit 5 stars. And then at this point, this was kind of what I stuck with until Hilda came out. And Hilda is what really kind of changed my options, because now I have another faction buffer that can buff the whole new reincarnation faction, which is really, really good, has a lot of good units. So at this point, I had a lot more flexibility. I dropped Angelina, picked up Noemi, dropped Liana and Lycoris, and picked up. At this point, I had Florentia already set up at 6 stars, and went ahead and got Rosen CL. And I believe this is what I had at the end. Noemi is doing pretty good. She's only 5 stars, which kind of sucks, and she had not great HP, which kind of hurt her a lot. I just recently got a increased range staff for her, which will reduce her attack power, her raw attack power, but she'll have extra even more range than she already has, and hopefully not kill herself on thorns. That's going to be the biggest issue going forward, is dealing with a bunch of tanks with thorns as well as crystal molders, because obviously that's going to reflect all the damage back at me. That's kind of why it tends to lean heavily on the meta being a lot of AoEs, because then you don't have to deal with any of the nonsense such as thorns. You also don't have to worry about the blood armor proccing or getting a wind wall against range attacks. Like, AoE just kind of goes around all of that, which is kind of ridiculous. So with this is what the team's looking like. This team's not going to change for quite a while. Himiko's coming out in, I think, a month, but I kind of mentioned I was kind of going back and forth of whether or not I was going to bother summoning her. At this point, I'm leaning towards no. I think last time I said I was going to go ahead and just try to get one, but to be honest, I just don't care about Himiko. I've collected every female character, but it might be just a mixture of a lot of things. I don't really care much for her artwork. The collab she's part of is not something I've ever watched. I think it's like with Taro or something like that. So I'm not familiar with it. I have no attachment to that. The other issue is I tend to watch a lot of the Chinese Apex matches, and nearly every single one has Himiko in it. She's usually in her mech form, which looks kind of cool, but I've seen that little cutscene 3 cost ability so many times, where she appears and throws 3 shurikens that just speed across the sky and stuff like that. I've seen that so many times, heard those sound effects so many times. I'm already tired of the character, and she's not even out in the US version yet, or not the US version, but the global version yet. She does have an interesting kit and a lot of neat things that I wish Tsubame had, but I don't know. Like I said, if I am going to get her, I'm going to try to just get one. I did do a bunch of summoning for Hilda, which was not a good idea. I had a lot of bad luck. I have a 6-star Warner, and I got more Warners after that, to the point where I just converted those Warner shards into Hilda shards. So I didn't get a single Hilda, despite all of the resources I put into it. That's another reason why I'm kind of leaning towards no on Himiko, and I'm just going to save up for Toa and Patsir when they come out. Toa is someone I'm definitely interested in trying to get into the box, because she is Reincarnation and Origins. The only thing that kind of sucks about her kit is, well, it's not really her fault, it's more the fact that Freya's faction buff does not actually give the standard faction buff, I guess you could call it, the SSR part of it. And unfortunately, many of her mechanics kind of revolve around having that on her character. So in order to fully use Toa's kit, I would need to rely on Hilda's faction buff to actually make that happen. It would do a number of things, like give her, first strike and guard bypass and all sorts of cool stuff. She also has got some aura things that are kind of neat. Patsir is going to be just kind of fun to have, because her entire kit's all about countering male characters. Which makes my box perfect counter for her, because obviously I don't use any male characters. So I look forward to someone having Patsir and not being able to do anything with her. I mean, she still has like her usual kit as well, but her main thing is she gets a lot of benefits for beating up on male characters. After that, the only thing I believe there's was it? I can't remember her name. It was like Prissy White or something like that. I don't remember her name, but actually I can look it up. Be right back. There we go, Sissy White. She'll be coming out. Unfortunately, she's not someone I really have room for. She's like Princess faction, I think, which is not something I really use anymore, which is kind of nice. I like the fact that I'm no longer using Princess, and I'm now using other factions, because Princess, unfortunately, gets shut down really easily, because they just have to ban the 2 factions that are faction buffers, and then that's it. I'm still going to go for Sissy White when she comes out, but she's kind of a weird summon support that has her own currency mechanic that can be kind of interesting, but I don't think it's going to be a good fit for this box. At this point, I'm going to be running out of room as far as like who to drop in this case. After Sissy White, I believe it's going to be the Ronin Warrior collab, at which point there's Kayura, I believe it is. Some people just call her not Jessica, because she kind of looks like Jessica, but she's not Jessica. And she's essentially a magic assassin. The only thing that's going to be a bit iffy about using her is her factions are like Dark and Time, I think it is, which are not something I have faction buffers for, but her kit really looks pretty good, and she also has kind of a pseudo juggler passive attached to her, which is something I definitely need in the case of AoE and all that good stuff. So definitely looking forward to those types of characters. But for the most part, assuming I don't go for Himiko, I'm going to have a few months where I can just kind of save up resources for Toa and Patsir. That'll be pretty nice. Exclusive items are definitely coming. Tsubame is going to be getting a new helmet that'll make her a little bit more viable. Naomi's helmet will actually be really nice because essentially anyone that has the cloak buff that she provides will actually get free dispels and a free passive heal on them, which will give my group even more pseudo secondary healing, which is really cool. Besides that, the only other character I'm interested in is Helena, but my Helena is only 4 stars, and she doesn't really become super viable until her exclusive armor comes out, which will make her a lot more mobile and a lot more capable of like just showering the opponent with debuffs. And her debuffs are really special because they disable gear, which is kind of cool. So I kind of have her sort of set up. I did watch some YouTubers that do something like a crit build where they try to just max out their crit and use something like Demon Slayer, so they can apply as many. They can just not even if you can't get debuffs applied, you can still dispel their buffs, which can be really useful. And using something like Crystal Blossom in combination with Petal Storm, I mean that could be a lot of things you can remove potentially from the entire group. But unfortunately, I don't really know where I'm going to put her, and I don't really have time to actually get her up to 6 stars yet. Right now, I'm working on Helena, Rosen CL, and Tensei Jessica. Tensei Jessica is now 5 stars. The big thing is going to be hitting 6 stars because that'll give her an increased range. And of course, I want Hilda to actually be up to 6 stars because she needs everything she can get to become a better tank. At 3 stars, she just couldn't tank enough. Rosenseal is halfway to getting to 6 stars. That'll definitely be a nice change. At 5 stars, she's pretty much viable at this point. And then Naomi, at that point, I also want to work on Naomi again, try to get her maxed out. I do kind of like this box setup where I have a mixture of assassins and long-range magical bombardment. And I'm hoping to stick with that for right now and see how that plays out. I'm also hoping maybe someday I'll actually get to use Florentia in combat, but so far they tend to ban her pretty quickly. I've gotten to use Rosenseal and Florentia in Forbidden Battleground and kind of getting used to using them, but unfortunately it's just kind of how the ban pick works. They definitely see these as threats. I mean obviously anyone that's going for AoE is going to ban Rosenseal very quickly. Rosenseal's actually someone I don't bother banning because I'm all single target, so I'm actually okay with my opponent taking Rosenseal in a lot of cases because it just means they have less healing, and she's actually pretty easy to kill. So yeah, that's pretty much it as far as the review itself. I've been having some reasonable luck for drops, but really bad luck for enchants, and of course I had some bad luck with the recent banner. There are some gear items that I'm still hoping to get, but have not seen. I need another blood pack so I can give that to Hilda. Besides that, I've been getting a lot of Tenyu headdresses, so that's actually giving me a lot more RNG in my box, which kind of sucks, but it's a good helmet. There's just no denying it. So having more of those is just very useful. I'm at the point where I'm actually putting them on my mages and not just on my healers. So that'll be kind of nice. And I've already gotten started with a gear for Toa. I'm going to make Toa a flyer, so I have already a last rites all set up and ready for her. And kind of have just a decent variety of gear. There's just certain items I just never get. I almost never get blood packs. I never get Twilight Stars, and I pretty much never get Scarlet Reapers. Besides that, honestly, I can't really complain too much about the luck on that front. Enchants I've been kind of suffering through. It's just, for whatever reason, just recently it's just not been going that great. At this point, I'm actually in a really good spot, just simply because I've been playing the game for so long. I'm at the point where every female character is maxed out on bonds, completely. Like, here's the last person, and completely maxed out bonds. So at this point, any keys I get is just going to be saved up for the next character, which also means I don't ever have to do the key dailies anymore. In fact, I've stopped doing them because I just don't need to. That puts me in a really good spot. Experience-wise, everyone's level 70, that matters. And at this point, every female character has mostly SSR gear now. So it's a really good spot to be in. I'm gradually filtering out the lower tier SSR stuff and using that to kind of bulk up the better gear. So I'm kind of in a good place on that front. Training-wise, I've been just kind of focusing on these new upgrades that buff all stats on a specific troop type. I've nearly maxed out Lancers again, which will be really nice. The new troop types, all the ones I really kind of cared about, I have maxed out now. So I have the Faceless now, just in case I use Sabame again. The Werewolves were really, really, really good. Having them on Shell tier is making her even better. So good stuff there. I'm actually starting to upgrade demon stats to try to maximize my damage output with them, since I tend to use demons on Shell tier and Sri Lanka. I of course have the Elven Cavalry Archers already maxed out. Really, really nice upgrade for Illustrial as well as Luna. I do kind of want to upgrade their stats better, but unfortunately I've just been so limited on resources working on the other things. I've been gradually upgrading troops or infantry. It's just a matter of not really wanting to use infantry. It's just something I just never used since I started the game. But if I really need to, I should be able to actually use them now. Besides that, I don't think there's anything else that stood out. I'm not bothering with the Mechanical Knights because I don't really need them right now. In fact, who even uses them? Letitia and Layla. Okay, so yeah, I definitely don't need them. And then as far as the flyers, I have Dragon Troopers almost maxed out, but I don't actually really need them unless I want to use Renata, which I don't really have a place for Renata, so I don't plan on using her. I was originally going to use them on Shell tier, because if she took damage, she would get the movement buff. But Werewolves are just super good. They're amazing. And then Pirate Raiders would be really good for Alucia, but she's just not a character I use that much right now. I do kind of want to max them out eventually, but for right now I'm focusing on stats. My flyer training is kind of fallen behind a little bit, but since I don't really rely on flyers that much anymore, it's not a huge loss for me. So yeah, besides that, really just kind of trucking on. Like I said, I'm in a pretty good spot at this point. So like things like Temple Wedding, I don't do them anymore. I don't need to. So that actually saves me a lot of time as far as dailies are concerned, which is good because I've been pretty busy nowadays. So that's pretty much it for right now. Sorry for being overly rambly, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next season.